Hello, one and all, and welcome to another Mere Models interview. I had the absolute pleasure recently of having a chat with Erica de Pellegrin, who is the host of the Balance Theory podcast in Sydney. Now, we started off our chat with a little bit of her background and her story, particularly relating to her attempt to diet down and get to a very low body fat percentage. She achieved this through intermittent fasting, cutting weight, doing cardio and whatnot. But the real interesting thing from it was her, mental processes and what she achieved and did not achieve and what she struggled with while trying to do this. We then transitioned over to talking about her podcast and what she's trying to achieve with that, before finally ending off with some goal setting methods, tips, techniques on how to get what you want out of life. Now, we also at the end had some little tidbits and went off into some different areas such as meditation, cold baths, and her favorite books. So if any of that sounds great to you, keep listening. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. One of the things we like to start off with is a mere mortal moment. So something that's happened throughout the past week or month or whatever, where you've had like a little bit of introspection and, I don't know, realize something about yourself or the world in general. Just wondering if you had a thought that you could share with us.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was sort of more towards the start of this whole lockdown period. My friend and I, we run a little like fitness boot camp on the side. And at the time we were umming and ahhing about whether we should continue it. And then COVID hit. So naturally we couldn't run the boot camps at all. So we were kind of at this crossroads where we had to sit down and really think like, are we going to think of how we're going to review the business and think of how we're going to take it elsewhere, or are we just going to kind of leave it to the side? And we decided we would try a little bit of online engagement, which turned out to go really, really well. We kind of founded a whole new audience. And since the start of lockdown to now, we've kind of like 5x our following, and like, now we're moving into products. So I think that moment for me, that crossroads moment, it's sort of like, do you pivot or abandon the task? And it's sort of brought light to my eyes that, if you just see an opportunity through, or you just open your mind to how things can be different, like great things can come of it. And I think it comes off the back of, yes, COVID is a terrible situation, but us humans, we're not immortal. And, you're not invincible. You are subject to these things, external events that are beyond your control. And COVID was one of them. And we had a choice. We could succumb to, the fact that we couldn't do our boot camps anymore, or we could, reshift and rewire how we were thinking and kind of spring from there. So that was my mere mortal moment.
Nice. Yeah, that's really cool as well, because now I suppose you have that additional skill. So, say things go back to normal in however long, you now have that additional skill. So it's like, okay, I can go back to what I was doing, and I've also got this new thing. So it's that's a real benefit.
No love lost.
Nice. And that actually springs me right into the first thing I wanted to talk about. So I've listened to a couple of your podcasts now, and in your first 0 episode, you talked about how you were trying to like lose body fat. And then I think in another one, you were mentioning that you are a PT. So I just wanted to, get you a little bit of a story on how you were going and what you were aiming for with that low body fat percentage, what that whole journey was about.
Yeah, sure. I think, so at the time I was working at the gym that I was training at. So I was actually studying law full time, but fitness was always something I was extremely passionate about. So I decided to simultaneously do my Cert 3 and 4 and work at my gym.
As you do.
As you do. And so the only way at the time we were kind of measuring people's progress was through like the BMI scans and like the in-body scans, which basically gave you like the body fat percentage. And so in my mind, I would do them periodically, and that's kind of how I would quote measure how I was going.
Yeah. How often would that be?
I tried to do them like every eight or so weeks.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a good stint. Like it definitely was going down. So that was sort of my measurement. But I remember this last time, and I spoke about it in the episode, but the last time I did it, I was like really, really hoping to get the lowest score I had received to date. I had been training really hard. I had tried out intermittent fasting. I had been really clean with my diet. I felt like that I looked my best, and I honestly felt like I had so much energy. And I went into the test, and it was like it had gone up back to like the first or second one that I had done. And I was just like so taken aback.
Yeah.
And that experience for me was probably another me mortal moment actually. But I sort of thought to myself, like, am I going to let this number dictate how I'm going? And then I sort of had to rewire why I was doing things. And I just thought, like, my goal at that point wasn't to lose weight. It was almost like I was chasing this number without having a goal or a vision that really mirrored what that result was giving. I was kind of like, you know, using that as a metric, but it didn't really match what I was searching for. So really what I was looking for, what makes me feel good, is when I've got a lot of energy, when I feel content within myself. And I just came to the conclusion that, you know, that number didn't really coincide or didn't match what I was looking for. So that was actually the last time I did a scan. And that whole process just really brought to my eyes what fitness means to me. And it's not, I don't really have a specific goal in terms of like weight loss or muscle gain or anything like that. Not to knock anyone that does that. I mean, I think I think hat off to you if you can, you know, set yourself a numerical goal and get there. But I think for me personally, I train for my mental health. It helps me bring my cortisol down first thing in the morning. It helps me really start the day off with a clean slate. And so I didn't need to keep doing tests or measurements to give me that, I guess, satisfaction or to tell me that I was doing great. I could just, you know, like enjoy the process and know that it was adding to my day-to-day life. It was just a part of my lifestyle.
Yeah, for sure.
So that was my kind of whole journey with the body fat epidemic, shall we say.
Yeah. So you were aiming, I guess, for like the health as a concept overall. Was that, I guess, what you were aiming for, rather than, just the numbers per se?
Yeah. So I wasn't really looking to lose weight or build body mass. I think I was more mentally just trying to push myself to see how far I could go. But then I realized that lower body fat didn't necessarily equate to holistic kind of wellness, which is more what I'm in tune with and more what works for me long term. You know, having a low body fat for me was never going to be something I continued for the rest of my life. And I wanted to more get into a proper routine and do things that I could easily carry out through the rest of my life. So yeah, it just turned out that chasing, I guess, that number didn't really align with how I viewed health. But that whole experience brought that to light and helped me understand my relationship with my why when it comes to fitness. So don't regret it for a minute. It was
100%.
fun.
Yeah, that's one of the crucial things as well, is those numbers are useful because you can use them as like a metric of finding how you are going, because it's terrible, I guess, starting off something and just be completely out in the wild. So I could relate that to learning Spanish for the first time when I was learning it, and I'd be picking up words, but I wouldn't really be able to see like how I was going. Whereas when I, started to keep a little bit of a count or like a log of all the words I knew when I was writing them down, I could then say like, okay, I know like 3 pages now. Maybe I can get to 5 pages. But obviously taking that to the extreme is silly as well, because then it's like, okay, I know all these words, but I can't actually speak it,
That's right. And don't get me wrong, like if your goal is to reduce body fat, then of course that's the perfect metric for you. It's the perfect way to test how you're going and kind of keep yourself on the right path. But for me, because I wasn't like chasing 5 kilos less, 10 kilos less, or more muscle mass, I didn't really have a goal that aligned with that metric. And so it was kind of a mismatch for me personally. Yeah. So that was more my experience with it. But if your goal, is chasing those results that test sort of gives you, then it's the absolute perfect metric.
Definitely. Was that your first time, I guess, seriously dieting to lose weight as well? Because the first time I tried to do that, to like properly get to a low body fat, it was terrible. I mentally had not experienced the challenge of dieting. Now I can do it a little bit easier, but back in that first time it was absolutely like terrible.
Yeah. Like, look, I've always sort of been in and out of dieting. I generally eat pretty healthily, but that was more like, yes, definitely a stricter part of my life. But I was doing really intense training. So I was doing F45 at the time, which you burn a crap load of calories doing. So, you know, like I think my understanding of nutrition now has come a long way, but eating less when you're doing training like that isn't always the best thing. And you know, it doesn't really give you the most energy. So I've come a long way since then, but yeah, that was probably one of the first times I've properly tried dieting.
Yeah. And what would you say you've learned from that, or like the main or core learnings that for you were, I guess, like your biggest mistakes or mishaps while doing that?
Yeah. Well, I guess it comes back to how I viewed health and wellness, and the fact that I subconsciously was seeking something more holistic, but I wasn't practicing things that were helping me get there. So when it came to diet, I did do calorie counting for quite a bit. And that was the first time I had tried it. That was in that period where I was measuring my body fat and all of that. And look, it was great. I thought it was a great experience to get your head around, you know, quantities and portion sizes.
Yeah.
Like even now, I kind of have a rough idea. A handful of this is approximately X amount of grams, and I understand what foods are fats and what foods are healthy fats, or you know, your carbs, your protein ratios, all of that. So that I got really used to it. But on the other side, I became really obsessed with the numbers. And you know, if something ended up being a couple grams over, I would, you know, I'd physically kind of feel sick because I was obsessed with eating within the calorie counting. And maybe that's because I'm very much like a control freak and a bit OCD like that. I just developed a really unhealthy relationship with eating. And every time I would kind of go off the tracks a little bit, I physically just did not feel well. I felt kind of guilty, and food became this thing that had to fit into my lifestyle rather than the other way around. Sorry, my lifestyle became a thing I had to fit into my food, and it was very restrictive, I found. So yeah, coming out of that period, I think I realized that, you know, using the body fat as an indicator, counting my calories, all of that didn't really squeeze into a more balanced view, which is something I definitely align with more and was subconsciously seeking the whole time. So that was my experience with the diet side of things.
Nice. And yeah, that gets nicely into to what you're doing as well. So one of the things I guess that why I wanted to reach out to you was I saw your Instagram page, and I really like what you're doing with the balance theory. And I wanted to know how did you come about your 3 core principles, and maybe give us an explanation of those as well.
Yeah, sure. So within the balance theory, the 3 areas are your health. So that comprises of your physical and mental. We've then got relationships. So that includes anything from love life to friendships to family. And the last area, I originally had called it work, but I changed it to fulfillment. So I'll go through each of them. I think how I came up with them, at the time I had attended a few courses, I've read a few books, and, you know, I think everyone has their own, you know, breakdown of the areas of your life. And I sort of just sat down and thought to myself, how would I simplify? Because there's a lot of models I've read that have like 8 different areas, 5 different areas, even more sometimes, and they can be quite complicated. But I like simplifying things. So I just felt that trio was a nice way to marry them all. And I felt like it really covered the majority of things that make up our lives. So yeah, I think the first area is pretty self-explanatory, your health. So within your physical, that comprises of everything we just spoke about, your exercise, diet, anything you do for your physical self-care, if it's, you know, like, I don't know, your baths, your face masks, those sorts of things. And then the mental aspect is everything from meditation to gratitude to mental health, emotional health, anything that falls under that category. So I just felt like those 2 really break down health, and they're equally as important as one another. And then, relationships I've sort of touched on already, but I just felt like there's a lot of pressure for people to, you know, have all the relationships. But I think as long as you're in tune with each of those relationships on some level, you know, your family, your relationships and your love life, you know, some people are single, some people don't have a lot of family around them, some people are more antisocial. So it's hard to say that that's the blueprint for everyone. But I think to some degree, like the majority of us do engage with each of those to some extent.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how I came up with the middle one. And the last one, like I said before, originally called it work. But I decided to change it to fulfillment because I felt like when I thought of single mums, for example, who spend a lot of time not, for example, building a career, but raising a family, you kind of exclude them if your focus is career. So I changed the term to fulfillment because then you capture people who are studying, who do things as a hobby, who are building a career, who may be parents, and that's what their fulfillment is. So I just felt like it was a nicer way to capture like all aspects of work that we may not traditionally deem as work.
Yeah. I think nowadays work really has taken on the meaning of something that you don't particularly enjoy. Like it's just something you have to do.
It's kind of a negative connotation to it.
Yeah. And yeah, so like me, for example, I used to work out in the mines and I left that, I'm getting on 4 years ago now. And I haven't had I guess like a proper work since then. So I would definitely fall into that same category of like, if I heard it, it'd probably be something that wouldn't capture my interest. Whereas fulfillment is definitely like, okay, yeah, that I can see how that would apply to my everyday life as well.
Yeah. And then I like, when I was thinking of the concept on a whole, for those people who aren't career hungry, or they're just, maybe they only work part-time, or they're students and they're studying full-time, I think to have kind of like a method or a theory that is so like angular when it comes to that aspect, I think you're just excluding a lot of people. And, if you can be fortunate enough that one day your work is your fulfillment as well, then I think you're more leaning towards calling it something you love rather than something you do like work.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's sort of how I devised that final pillar.
Nice. And so I did something, I guess, sort of similar quite a while ago. It was actually, probably 4 or 5 years ago, where I sat down over like, I don't know, 5 or 6 weekends. And I basically just had this book and I just started drafting out what's really important to me. And I came up with, there was 8 categories in general. And I just want to know, like, your drafting process for this, like, how long did you sit on the idea of these 3? Were there others that were floating in and around, or was it like always, I guess, those 3? And did you include like what other people were thinking as well? So, or was this, what's really important to you?
Yeah. I have a similar story to kind of what you just said. So I sat down and kind of thought to myself, what is most important to me? And when I was drafting it out, I had heaps of things written down and I thought I need to categorize these in some way.
Yeah.
And also think if I'm doing a podcast, it's not always just it's not always what's important to me. For example, religion, so spirituality, is not something that features quite prominently in my life, but for a lot of people it does. So I couldn't exclude that either. So I kind of wrote down all the big things that are important to me, friends, family, work, hobbies, education, all those sorts of things. And then, like I said, I tried to simplify it. So when I came to branching everything together, I always wanted to be under like 4. I just thought it would be easier to categorize. I just sort of picked a 3 and ran with it. But like I said, originally I had health, relationships and work. And it was only just before I started the podcast and I was kind of coming up with episode 0. It just didn't really fit. Work didn't really fit with what I was saying. I felt like it just didn't feel right. So that at that point, that's when I changed it. But yeah, it was work up until just before launch.
Nice. And I remember, so your first like couple of posts, or quite a few of the posts on Instagram, were, I guess, leading up to you actually starting with episode 0. So how long was it where you decide between like deciding I'm going to start it to actually doing the first episode?
Yeah, there was a bit of a lag. So it was actually New Year's Day this year. My partner and I, we went away for New Year's Eve with some friends, and we were just sort of bouncing around ideas of what was happening this year, because he's just recently started his own business as well.
Nice.
And in the past, we had sort of thrown around that it'd be cool if I did a podcast, because I'm always quite articulate when we chat, and I love writing and those sorts of things. So he said it again on the 1st of Jan. He said, why don't you do a podcast? And I just felt this like calmness within me. And it just felt like, yeah, why don't I do a podcast? It just felt like right. And I was like, I think this is a sign from somewhere. As I said, I'm not religious, but perhaps I'm spiritual. I said, I think this is a sign I need to do it. So I pondered on like a name for a few days, and, obviously just checked out if the name was taken, if there was a podcast already out there, settled on the Balance Theory, which I really liked and was super surprised it wasn't taken.
Yeah.
And then I started the Instagram, because I thought, and this kind of is something I try and do in my own life too. Like, if you put it out there that you're doing it, you're kind of making a commitment, like a vow. And so even though I was scared as hell, I didn't even know where to start. I was like, if I just start the Instagram, I get some friends to follow me, and I start building like a bit of a theme, start building a bit of a following, then, I'll slowly chip away at it. Originally, I had decided March was going to be when I sort of released everything and got the ball rolling.
Yeah.
But I started my new job in January, and sort of as I was, committing to that, getting used to that, I just sort of said, oh, well, I can't do it just now. And I sort of kept making excuses. And it was always that thing, I can't get to it just now. I had the boot camp going, and, I sort of made excuses, but I think I was a bit petrified to just start. Yeah. So I did spend quite a bit of time researching equipment, listening to a lot of other podcasts on how to get started and just tips. And I had made a big list of things I wanted to research and educate myself on first. And then as I slowly got to the bottom, it was like, buy the equipment and just do it. And I was like, oh, I'm here now. So that was around March when I bought the equipment. And then we went into lockdown. And I just thought, this is the perfect time, because I ended up working from home full time. Yep. So, you save that time in the morning commuting. You've got, your lunch breaks at home during the day. I had a lot of time to really just put my energy into it. And that's what I did. And it felt like the right time. I sort of felt like up until that point, I was sort of rushing it, and it didn't feel like organic in a way. I don't know, maybe I was too rattled or too distracted. I'm not too sure. But it was sort of in that period where it felt like, okay, now's the right time to get the ball rolling. And yeah, I just slowly chipped away at it. I started drafting episode 0. I recorded it. I played around with editing. And then I said to myself, I want to pre-record maybe 2 or 3 guests, just so I've got 1 to 2 months worth of content, like up my sleeve, that I can start, preparing, because I didn't know how long it would take me to edit. And, obviously the more you do it, the faster you get at it. And you find all these little hacks. You're like, God, I wish I knew that at the start, but it gets better. And then, so it ended up being June. So I ended up doing a bit of recording through April and May. I did all the editing, and then it was sort of June 1 was, let's just get it done. And haven't looked back since.
Nice. Yeah. And that's, I suppose, like you mentioned telling people that you're going to do it. And that's something we've actually started doing as well with our goal planning. So we really love, like me and my friend Juan, we like absolutely just like love goal planning. It is, it's not the core of this podcast of what we do, but it's pretty high up there as well. And one of the things we've started doing is releasing like monthly goals. So it's probably pretty boring, to be honest, if people actually watched it, because it's just talking about, things that are quite personal to both of us. But it's a way for us to be like, okay, it's really out there now. Like, it's not even just you and I accountable to each other. It's to everyone in general. And so, if it's like we go through a whole month and do nothing, well, that looks, kind of shit on you to a big audience as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's 2 really good things about doing that. It's like you said, number 1, accountability, because you're making like a vow that you're doing it. You're kind of making a promise to whoever's receiving it. And then you feel obliged to, come through with that. So when I originally made the Instagram, I never said a date, but I said it was coming. I said I was slowly building, and so I was gearing people up. They were expecting it, so I had to keep growing and keep going. It kind of kept me accountable, like you say. And I think the second thing is you're kind of making an intention. And I don't know if this is something you've personally done before, but I feel like when you say something, like almost like an affirmation, it's kind of like all actions you do thereafter are geared towards making that come true. Or it's almost like you put it out to the universe and then somehow it happens, like even though I've just sat here and described all the steps that have gotten me where I am now, it just sort of happened as well. It wasn't something I methodically sat down and planned out. It just kind of came together as well. But I think like if you set your intention and you hold yourself accountable, that's a really nice way to see those goals through.
Yeah. For me, that's always been writing it down. I actually looked back not too long ago at a bunch of goals that I'd written when I was 21 or something. And it was like things to do before I'm 26. And they was stupid and outlandish. Like it was like, become a millionaire. Nothing that nowadays I look at, I'm like, I don't want that. Like that's nothing that interests me. But, some of them I actually progressed quite a lot on, even though from then on it wasn't that conscious. So I sort of agree. There is something, a little bit strange or a little bit.
You kind of plant the seed. It's kind of like, what do they call it? Your reticular activation system, like kind of, when you see a model of a car and then you see it everywhere.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that association. So if you tell yourself something and then, for example, like I found when I said I was going to do a podcast, then when I would speak or meet new people and they might say something that surrounded the idea of a podcast, or they spoke about a podcast and I put it out there, then you get the good energy vibes off them. You learn something from them. They introduce you to someone. Like if it's in the back of your mind and it's sort of in the works, you just kind of, it comes to fruition.
Yeah.
You end up making it a part of your conversations and your interactions somehow.
Yeah. It's very strange. So do you have a method, I suppose, for your own way of implementing goals or planning?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a writer, like hands down. I'm pen and paper, diary, more short-term, I guess, small scale. Every Sunday I write down kind of my mini goals for the week. And that's more like things to get done. But I treat them as goals because, they're things I need to achieve that week in order to kind of move on the next week. Yep. So on a small scale, yes, I do that. And I do the same with my long-term goals. I'm not as avid to write them down, say, every 6 months, but I did actually find a list that I wrote at the start of the year. And it is a nice thing to look back at it. It was kind of like start the podcast, read 10 books, and I could literally go through and tick off some of those things. So that was really like exciting. And I think as humans, we like that feeling of accomplishment. So even in my week to week short term, if I've done something and it wasn't on my list, I'll literally write it down just so I can tick it off. Because it's just like a little dopamine hit. Like I love it. But another thing that I've actually got a podcast coming out on Monday the 3rd, all about setting goals. But essentially, and this is something I've kind of tried to embed in my own life. So when I'm setting goals, I try and make them process-based rather than outcome-based. Yep. So essentially what I mean is I'll use the example of weight loss, for example. So instead of writing, I want to lose 5 kilos, I would change that and make it process-based. So I want to start training 5 times a week.
Yep.
Right? Because I feel like if your goal is based on an outcome, that outcome more often than not has so many factors that mean it may or may not happen, whether you do the work or not. So like I said to you before, my diet was perfect. I was training like crazy, but I wasn't really getting the outcome I wanted, albeit I hadn't really defined what that was. But, your sleep levels, the amount of stress you have, just external things, COVID, like there are things that happen that you can't really control, but what you can control is the day-to-day things you do to get there. So I think one thing for me when I'm setting my goals is I try and make them process-based, because that's all stuff I have control over. So like with the podcast, rather than saying I want to have 10,000 downloads by September, I'm saying I want to interview, you know, these specific people by September. It's more about like the work you put into it rather than the end result. Not that that shouldn't be, I guess, in mind, but more like a goalpost rather than the destination. You kind of got to focus more on the journey to get there. I don't know. I've just found it something that's helped me kind of stay on path and make things more of, you know, how can I say it? Like I actually stick to them more than because I feel like if you don't hit that outcome, like for example, if I don't hit the 10,000 downloads by September, you kind of end up feeling really bad. You feel like you haven't achieved what you set out to achieve. Whereas if you say like, okay, I'm going to interview 3 people, and you do that, you kind of let go of the outcome.
Yeah. Well, it's getting that balance between thinking about the future and living in the present. And so, yes,
that's right.
you absolutely need to think of, okay, like how am I going to eat? How am I going to blah, blah, blah. You know, as humans, that's definitely something we need. And that's, you know, hardwired into us, which is why we like being able to, you know, scribble off something that we've written down and, you know, get that dopamine. Yes, I did achieve that. That's awesome. But then on the flip side, it's being able to be in the process, be in the moment, I guess, not thinking too much. And you got to find that right balance for yourself. Some people can go, you know, 99% thinking of the future and then 1% living in the moment. And that's okay for them. And then there's, I guess, like, you know, the Buddhist monks, the type of people who go into the mountains and all they do is, you know, live in the present, and not much of their day to day is spent thinking about, okay, am I going to, you know, get the wife and kids? Am I going to get that material thing or whatever it is? So yeah, you definitely need to have that balance between the two of them. And one of the things that I do personally with goal planning is the long-term goals. I make that, very subjective or qualitative. So I'm never really sure if I've achieved it or not. But the real short-term stuff, like the month to month, you know, week to week, that's where I can put a number on it and be, yes, read a book this week or whatever, and then scribble it off and get that dopamine, as you said.
Yeah. And it's also about like, I think we forget to reward ourselves too, like to give yourself a pat on the back and say, hey, I have achieved all these things. We get so caught up in like, what's next? Okay, I've done that. All right, on to the next. But we never really, I mean, I definitely do this. I never really stop and say, well, just hang on. Like, why don't you just acknowledge everything you've achieved before you kind of rush on to the next thing? It's always kind of like, all right, hit it, next, level up. It's kind of like, do you know what I mean? So I feel like if I once I started reframing those goals in that way, I was able to say, like, acknowledge what I had achieved more than just sort of tick it off and move on.
For sure. Probably the most beneficial thing I've done in the last 3 years has been able to introspect in a useful manner. I used to, when I was quite young, before I like went to the gym, before I got into calisthenics and things, I had absolutely terrible body issues. Like I was very skinny, and you see some of the photos of me back then, and I was like arms like twigs. And that I always had like an active brain, and that introspection was there, but it was all in the negative sense, like judging upon myself and putting it in. And it's probably only been like the last 4 years where I've really been able to, I guess, use that same concept, but take it inwards and just sort of be with myself in a way. It's sort of hard to describe. I've got into meditation and things like that as well. And, I can't speak about it exactly. Like there's definitely people out there who can speak of it way, way better and more useful terms. But that being able to take a step back and just like look at yourself and go, okay, I'm at peace now. This is, you don't need to worry about whatever. You can just sit there for a moment, and that's all it requires, a moment.
Yeah, just enjoy and absorb.
100%. Cool. I've got just a couple of like random quick fire questions. You don't have to answer them super quickly, but we'll get into it. What was cold bath like? How was the getting into the cold for you?
Oh, the ice baths.
The ice baths,
look, that was more mentally challenging than physical. Like but I must say, like, so with traditional meditation, I find it quite difficult to like get my mind still and then have my body follow.
Yeah.
You know, like I find that process difficult at times. I feel like I'm always racing. But with the ice bath, and one of the ones that I've done, it was actually like a stress management type of angle. So they said to you, like, the ice is like water, it's going to hit you in life, and it's all about how you respond. And I found that when I got in the bath, because I was just trying to keep my body relaxed, my mind had no choice but to follow. So it's kind of the opposite to meditation. And I found that because I was so singularly focused on the cold, or like, just actually, let me rephrase that. I was so singularly focused on breathing to distract me from the cold.
Yeah.
I found I was at like utter peace. It was strange, very difficult, because your mind can snap in and out of that concentration very, very quickly. But it was a really good way to just practice concentration and just being at peace and just sort of silence. You know, I was not stressing about emails I've received or all the mundane things that I generally kind of stress or muse over, ruminate over. But yeah, it was an awesome experience. I would definitely do it again. I hate the cold, but I would recommend it to anyone just to give it a go.
Yeah, we're too similar. I just started doing cold showers and the Wim Hof breathing. So it's sort of like a focus. And yeah, same with me. I absolutely detest cold. Winter is the worst month for me out of all of them. You know, I'm hoping.
Well, hat off to you for doing them at the moment. I was very good in the summer. You know, like I would exercise in the morning and then I would cold shower straight after, and I felt amazing. I felt fantastic.
Yeah.
But I will admit, as it's gotten colder, I have put that on pause. But yeah, I definitely found, I also like the mental challenge of it. Like, I hate this, but I'm going to put myself through it and suck it up anyway. It's kind of a nice mental challenge as like a total side note.
Yeah.
But yes, the breathing and the cold, it's an awesome experience. I think, yeah, I definitely will do it ongoingly.
Nice. What book has been most influential to you in terms of, and it can be in any terms, good or bad?
Oh, there's so many I've read that I've loved. I just recently finished Limitless by Jim Quick.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah,
so
I think it's on my list.
Yeah, it's really, really good. So he's like, his story actually is that he had a brain injury when he was quite young, and so he teaches learning how to learn. So how you can learn better, essentially, and it goes off into how you can read faster, how you can absorb more information, how you can improve your memory. So that was a really cool book, very compact. It went into like things you can be eating for your brain, so like brain health, exercises you can do for it, ways to read and improve your memory. And it's actually funny, one of the first dates I went on with my long-term partner now, he whipped out this like trick, shall you say, where he said, all right, give me 30 words in any random order and I'll remember them from 1 to 30 in perfect order. And I'm thinking, like, is this guy joking? So I've written them down because I wouldn't have remembered them myself. Written them down, given them to him in a complete random order, and then he's literally read them, and he actually goes, I think he was trying to impress me, and side note, totally worked.
Yeah.
But he went backwards. He went from 30 to 1. And I'm just looking at this list thinking, like, I can't even explain how this guy's doing it right now. And he told me at the time, this was 4 or 5 years ago, that he had just done Jim Quick's course. And that was one of the memory tricks. He teaches how to, I guess, memorize things or retain information like that. And we actually saw him at an event earlier this year called Higher Branch. And he spoke at the event and he was awesome. And then he was just releasing his book. So I thought I had to read it and I would definitely recommend it. It was just like very insightful, very easy to read, and he's got a nice way of delivering information. So that's been quite an impactful book to me, and I think slightly sentimental as well.
Nice. And it's great that it's such a recent one as well.
So I think it came out in like April or something.
Yeah. I've been consuming so many books recently and trying to, I guess, mix it between old and new. So like classics, 100, more than 100 years old. And some of them are great, and then some of them are really shit as well, like almost unreadable. And then it's the sort of the same with recent ones as well. People will talk about like, oh, this book's amazing, and I read it and it just doesn't do anything for me. But then there's another one which is, yeah, like a year or two old, and it just blows your mind.
Yeah, I think it also depends like where you're at in life.
Yeah,
when you read
100%.
it. Like, try reading something now, might not relate to you, but later it will. But I'm the kind of person, if by like chapter 2 or 3 you don't have me, like I'm not pushing on. I just I just don't really bother. But one thing I did like about Limitless, which a lot of books, I think more modern books do, is they kind of have little activities or like freeze moments in there where they tell you to like think about something or do an activity. I quite like those because I feel like I'm applying what I've just read and putting it in practice.
Yeah.
So that's another thing, another resource, I guess, that book had that I really liked.
Nice. Awesome. Well, this was so cool, Erica. Thank you so much for joining me. If people want to see more, no worries. If people want to know more, where can they find you, or how do you want them to interact with you?
So you can go on our podcast page at The Balance Theory, or you can DM me on my personal page at Erica D. Pelle. And yeah, happy to chat further with anyone. But yeah, this has been an honor. And
no
so
worries. No worries. Awesome. All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much.